You're watching CHCO-TV's gavel-to-gavel coverage of the October 10, 2023 Special Council meeting for the town of St. Andrews. I'm Florence Mitchell.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. Today's Special Council meeting consists of 3 presentations for funding requests. The first presentation is by Steve Saunders, Chair of Katie's Cove Incorporated, who's asking for $15,000 to assist with operational costs of Katie's Cove, employment of staff, maintenance of water quality, and improvement to the access road and parking lot.
The second presentation is being made by Franklin Carty of the Charlotte County Archives, who is asking for $8,000 to support the Archives tourism services, which includes day-to-day maintenance of the Archives building and the courthouse and summer student salaries.
The third and final presentation is being made by Gerald McEachran of Sunbury Shores, who's asking for $5,000 to support the organization's programs, primarily those for adults and seniors.
Finally, Council will discuss capital and utility expenditures for the 2024 Town of St. Andrews budget. Now let's join Council in the W.C. O'Neill Arena Complex Council Chambers.
All right, everyone, let's call to order the special council meeting. Here we are on Tuesday, October 10th at the W.C. O'Neill Arena Complex. We are streaming through Zoom and Facebook this evening as well. Appreciate CHCO as always being here. I don't think in the past we necessarily had all of our budget meetings recorded and put it to public, so thank you for the extra coverage. It's certainly appreciated as we want to try to be as transparent about this process as possible. All members of council are in attendance, so thank you very much, council, for being here. Appreciate it, as well as staff. And I do want to recognize that we are on this unceded traditional territory of the Beskoto-Mugati people. Approval of agenda. It is all related to the budget process. We have 3 presentations regarding special funding requests, and then of course we're going to go through. It says draft 2, but in reality we're going to spend our time talking about capital projects this evening, and of course with that the utility fund comes in as well. So I'll be looking for a mover to accept the agenda as circulated. I've got Councillor Harlan and then seconded by Councillor Heenan. Any discussion changes to the agenda? Go ahead, Councillor. Okay. Do you know? You don't have to say the subject matter, but do you know which one of the? Okay. Thank you very much. So it is in the agenda. It is marked as closed session, so I don't really need an amendment on that. So I appreciate it, but thanks for bringing it to my attention. We just will need a mover and a seconder and a vote to go into closed at that time. And again, you've got that noted for the minutes of the read. Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Knopper. Anyone else? Okay, so I'll call the question. All in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye. It's everybody. The agenda is approved. Any conflict of interest for this evening? Okay, if anything pops up this evening, feel free to declare it, which gets us right into the heart of the meeting. And we do have 3 presentations tonight, plus we want to talk about a budget. So although all of these are very important organizations in our community, we ask the presenters to keep it as close to 10 minutes as possible. And council, I know we have a tendency of asking lots of questions, which is a good thing, but please keep your questions as specific as possible so we can get through the agenda in the time that we have this evening. So our first presentation is Katie's Cove Incorporated. It is their presentation on their funding request. I think there's multiple members, but it does say Steve Saunders will be the main presenter this evening. So if you'd like to come up to the podium, just so everybody at home can hear you as well, we appreciate you being here.
Well, good evening, Your Worship and council members. I'm Steve Saunders, current chair of Katie's Cove Incorporated Board of Directors. Thank you for inviting me here to present our group's request for funding. Tonight, I am submitting a request of a grant of $15,000 to the town. And I've got a few slides here that will give a little bit of background on Katie's Cove Incorporated, is what it's all about, and what we intend to do with our $15,000. All right, next slide. As you know, KCI is a nonprofit corporation that was spun off of the St. Andrews Kiwanis Club in 2018. And our board comprises a diverse group of professionals, including an architect, some healthcare professionals, real and pseudo engineers, the town's recreational director, and a talented PR multimedia specialist. Now, upon our incorporation, we negotiated a 20-year lease of the waterfront Katie's Cove property with the previous Algonquin Hotel ownership. So that takes us up to 2039. And by that point, Councillor Goumachel will probably only be running half marathons. Next slide. Our mission is to provide the town residents and its visitors with a waterfront park that is accessible to everybody. Now, to date, we've been able to upgrade the property with the construction of washroom and changing buildings, plus landscaping and some much-needed drainage improvements. So in addition to providing a swimming area, we've been able to provide the St. Andrews Paddle Club with a practice facility, plus a venue for their annual Race by the Sea Dragon Boat Festival. Also, our playground is used by young families year-round, and now we've got weekly sand volleyball practices being held at the Cove. May point out that the dragon boat racing this year was quite popular, and the winning team was captained by our own mayor. All right, Paul, I'm ready for the next slide. And we're quite thankful for town support in previous years. It's been critical and quite significant. You can see from this list on this slide that it includes weekly input from the town staff, and that input rivals the work that goes into the town's own park properties. Now, to keep things working, the KCI board has regular meetings with the town staff, and along with planning and logistics that we get from these meetings, we also get a lesson in how civic government works. All right, next slide. We have multiple challenges. So what we're looking at is we have have-tos and want-tos. Now, our list of have-tos is we have to maintain our buildings and grounds, plus we carry insurance policies both for insurance for the buildings and our liability. And without these, we'd be left with the option of just putting a padlock on the place. Our list of want-tos is a long one. It includes employing a staff, lifeguards, swimming lessons, doing something about water quality. But this year, our want-to is to improve the access road and the parking lot. And we've got a marvelous piece of evidence here of a van with its wheels, back wheels in the air while it was trying to turn around. Next slide. This is our list of our forecast costs for 2024. They total approximately $26,700 plus or minus. Now this list, the road and the property maintenance are projections. We don't know what trees are going to fall down or what storms are going to produce washouts. But the other entries are hard numbers, and they're based on our 2023 expenses. These include things like dealing with ants and our insurance and keeping the bathrooms clean. All right, next slide. So this is my concluding slide, and it's my points are threefold on here. We'd like the town to provide continuation of the in-kind support on the property, mowing lawns, emptying trash, and this grant for $15,000 that I was talking about. And item 3 was thrown at the last minute. We think that the existing sortie trail arrangement is unsafe as it stands, and we'd like to see some of the trail accessibility grant applied to routing the trail through Katie's Cove. We had discussed with sortie the notion of coming down past the playground and having the trail run right in front of the bathrooms. And that, I think, brings me in under 10 minutes. We can entertain questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate it. And you were well within the 10 minutes, so thank you for that. First and foremost, as you alluded to, Councilor Neal and myself had the opportunity, and I know other members of council, but we were down for the Dragon Boat Festival, and honestly, those washrooms and new buildings, just when you go by there, it gives it a new sense of life, and it's more than just washrooms. It just shows that there's investment in there, and it's not a forgotten property, and really, you can see improvement every year, but now that you're actually seeing buildings there, you can actually visibly see that it's a place that isn't forgotten about now. So thanks for all your efforts on that. A quick question for me before I pass it over to council is about the rerouting of the Van Horn Trail. I know Sorty's kind of, I almost consider it a cousin of yours. Is this something that they think is a priority as well within kind of, because staff has met with them as well as councillors, and originally was not identified as a priority project for them. They had a list of projects that they said this is our priorities, and I don't believe it was included. So I was wondering, has their position changed, or is this just preliminary thought that hasn't been?
I would qualify it as preliminary thought. There's a lot of cross-pollination.
Yeah.
I'm on Sorty, and there's a couple of members here who are too. It's their big thing is about accessibility. And, I guess the notion of people making their way through a potholey parking lot with cars backing in and out with walkers and wheelchairs was not really tenable.
Thank you. Any other member of council have a question? Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you, Your Worship. I also cycle through there a lot, and I agree. And I'm on the Trails Advisory Committee too, so I do hear what you're saying with the safety of that parking lot, and I have noticed it firsthand myself. My main question for you, though, is regarding the lease and the new ownership of the hotel. Are you afraid that there's going to be any impact to that lease with new ownership? Have you spoken to new ownership yet?
We will learn more tomorrow morning at 9:30.
Okay, thank you.
3 of us have a meeting with the new management, and we are hoping to continue with the relationship we had with the previous ownership, and we'd like to get the concept of us either buying or having Katie's Code given to us by the new owners. It's a long shot, but we have some compelling arguments for that.
Thank you. Councillor Harlan.
Thanks for the presentation. So you said that your priority this year is the parking lot and the road upgrades, but you have a long list. So has the board developed like a multi-year plan in terms of what would be some of the other priorities and where they might fit in terms of timing?
We spent a lot of time throwing ideas around. One of the projects we're going to get involved in this fall is to address the water quality, and we want to enlist the help of Eastern Charlotte Waterways. They don't work for free, so we're planning on applying for a grant.
Okay.
Also, to that end, UNB brings classes down every summer, and we figure there's probably 3 or 4 graduate thesis worth of projects that can be done with the code.
Right.
What we've got there is a lab, right? The water temperature goes up every month, like on a 28-day cycle, multiple times a summer. And that's the only body of water on the East Coast, saltwater, that does that. So we want to look into bathymetric surveys, runoff coming from properties around the cove, and seeing what impact stormwater has on it. So there's lots of things there. So that's this year. It all depends on what we get grant-wise, but we'd like to build a pavilion there so the place could be used for things like wedding receptions and weddings. Mm. As far as timing's concerned, a lot of it depends on money available and the direction that the board is going.
So I can appreciate that there are lots of ideas, and knowing a few of your board members, they have, I'm sure, have lots of great ideas. It would be really great for me as a counselor to sort of understand more completely what the direction is or what the vision is. I guess seeing it as just year to year, it's hard to see what the ultimate vision is. Recognizing that it is just a strategic plan, it's not, a fait accompli, because you don't know what the funding is going to be year to year. But it would be really helpful, and I think it would be helpful for the public to kind of get a sense of where do you want this to go, or where you see this going. So if the board could consider that, I think that would be helpful.
I think that's an important input. And we have discussed that with Chris and Paul. Okay. And talked about coming here not just for a 1-year
right.
grant, but a 5-year plan.
Right.
And what you're talking about is essential. So you can say, okay, at this point, 2 years from now, we will be here,
right.
and then there.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other member of council? Mr. Spear.
Thank you, Worship. Sorry, Steve, I just want to bring up a couple of things. I guess the first one is, in our initial discussions, you talked about kind of a additional grant for work already completed. It was another 15 for the washroom, for the trails that you had to be constructed this year. Is that kind of off the table now? Or is
Yes.
that, okay.
Well, not off the table, but the 15 that we're asking for tonight, it doesn't include what would be done as far as the trail's concerned. We were thinking that the town would probably tap into the $1.5 million grant they got through SORTI for accessibility to trails.
And have you solved the charitable status thing yet? Or let me rephrase that. I know you haven't got your status, but are you continuing to work on it, or are you just continuing now as a nonprofit?
We're
in the
continuing as a
future?
nonprofit.
Okay.
We have applied for charitable status 3 times. And the sticky point is we don't own the property that capital investment would go into. So that's part of what we want to talk about with the hotel management tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Worship.
All right, well, thank you very much for the presentation this evening, and we are literally in budget time, so it couldn't be a better time to present, and we will deliberate and either way get back to you for sure.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. All right, next presentation, council, is we have Franklin Carty here. So Mr. Carty is presenting a funding request for the Charlotte County Archives. Mr. Carty, any video today? Or?
Yes.
Oh, there we go, video. They're pretty impressive, thank
Say
you.
one word first, just to emphasize that this is for the tourism services that we're providing for the town of St. Andrews. This is not general archiving support. This is specifically for services, and we're hoping that you will help us pay for what we aren't able to get from other sources. We do have a presentation. It is exactly 10 minutes. It was. Good evening, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor Akaji, councillors. Thank you for this opportunity. First, let me say that we acknowledge that the lands on which we live are the ancestral lands of the Passamaquoddy people, the Besko Tumugati. We appreciate the opportunity to live and learn on this territory in mutual respect and gratitude.
Hello and welcome to the Charlotte County Archives. Come this way to our research room. If you pause, you can see all the microfilm that we have here of various Charlotte County newspapers from the past 200 years. And here is our research room and library full of resources for your research into genealogy, local history, and we're happy to help you to dig deeper into the archival collections and photographs.
The mission of the archives is to collect, preserve, and conserve, through archival best practices, the preeminent collection of significant documents relating to the evolving history and culture of Charlotte County. And we actively engage the public through research, education, and outreach. As keepers of the documentary heritage of St. Andrews and Charlotte County, we strive to ensure the endurance of the stories and memories linking the past, present, and future of our community. We are a volunteer-run, not-for-profit corporation entirely dependent on raising funds to maintain our operations. Our job is to operate an archives service for the whole county, now the Southwest region. To do this, we solicit funds from all available grants, and each year we have to ask individual private sector donors to cover our core staff salary costs. That is why we are reaching out to the municipalities of the Regional Service Commission to support around 1/3 of the total operational costs. We are hopeful that the member municipalities of the Southwest region will support our approach to the Regional Service Commission to help ensure the sustainability of the regional archive service we provide. Our office, archival vault, and research facilities are located in the old Charlotte County Jail, beside the old county courthouse overlooking the large green common. The buildings, both of which are architectural icons, have been promoted as historic attractions by the town and the province for decades. These landmark properties attract individuals, families, school groups, and organised bus tours who tour both properties. The Archives has been hosting this tourist service for the town, despite it being quite separate from our mandate as the County Archives. So this request for support is for the tourism services we are providing specifically for the town of St Andrews. These tourism services include applying for federal and provincial grants to contribute to the cost of hiring students and interns, the provision of individual tours for visitors throughout the summer, 7 days a week in the high season, day-to-day cleaning and maintenance of both buildings, including the public washroom facilities in the courthouse, the essential promotion of the facilities and tours on social media, the design, printing and distribution of rack cards to attract visitors, supervising special events such as paranormal investigations and ghost walks. To do this as effectively as possible, including being open 7 days a week in July and August, we aim to hire 3 summer students. This year we obtained funding for 2 from Young Canada Works and 1 from Canada Summer Jobs. But these grants covered only 67% of the total employment expenses of the YCW students and 81% of the CSJ. So the Archives had to find almost $5,000 from its own donor-contributed funds to cover the balance. By default, it is our professional archives manager, Anna Krentz, who runs the summer tourism program. This position is entirely funded by individual donations we must raise. The time she must spend on applying for funding, seeking, interviewing and appointing applicants, and then training and supervising them on an ongoing basis is substantial. Projections for next year suggest that with inflation, combining the ungranted costs of the students and the CCA-funded time of our archivist, we will have to draw as much as $8,000 from the donor-contributed funds we hope to raise this fall. Note that these costs are only a small part of our overall operating costs, which we also have to fund. So we believe our request for funds to support us in operating tourism services at the courthouse and the old jail is reasonable. In effect, we have been operating the courthouse and old jail voluntarily with little or no compensation from the town. It is true that there is some marginal overlap between our tourism and core responsibilities. Tourism helps draw some attention to the archives as well as the old jail. Tourism students are given basic training by our manager and useful jobs to do when they are not actually giving tours. This can help marginally with the archives program. We do receive voluntary donations from tourists which contribute to the cost of our program. The overall total of visitors so far this year is 2,523, almost double last year. But total receipts are $3,480, little more than last year. The big increase in visitor numbers was indicative of the success of our efforts, but still much less than we believe the potential to be with increased effort. The other historic properties the town runs have dedicated staff and a line item in the town's budget for wages and benefits for their staff. In the town's budget estimates for other properties that the town runs, wages and benefits amount to well over $30,000 per annum at each of the library, the Ross Museum and the Sheriff Andrews House. But nothing is budgeted for wages and benefits for the courthouse or the old jail. We do appreciate the good relations we have been experiencing with town administration and public works. They have been very responsive to any needs that arise, and we enjoy a very cordial landlord-tenant relationship. Please also note that, at our own expense, we have also made such improvements as we can to attract tourists and enhance their experience. For instance, we have produced and installed interpretive panels in the old jail and beside the driveway entrance on the Frederick Street Common, as well as pop-up removable banners in the courthouse. We would like to see further enhancements made, including a more interactive experience for visitors, with videos, perhaps even holograms and the like. The Archives is a non-profit corporation, and it behooves us to manage our affairs in a fully professional and responsible manner. Recently, we have been increasing the pressure on our donors to help us meet our annual fundraising needs of about $100,000. As we do so, however, we must look more closely at where we are spending their money. Our finding that with inflation, about $8,000 of that will be needed next year for tourism services makes us review whether that is the best use of our individual donors' contributions. Hence, our recent request to the town to cover those costs on an ongoing basis by including a line item in the budget for wages and benefits for tourism services at the courthouse and old jail. The Archives has been hosting this tourist service for the town, despite it being quite separate from our mandate as the county archives. We hope, therefore, that Council will see the merit of our request for inclusion of a line item in the budget for $8,000 to maintain this service, and will agree to approve it. Note that this will still be much less than for the other historic properties the town runs. Thank you for your attention. I will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Cardy. I will say those presentations always amaze me because someone who's made a few videos in my day, I know how much time and effort that must have went into for a 10-minute presentation. I would say that took hours and hours, so thank you, but it's very clear and very nice to have visuals with it, so the extra effort doesn't go unnoticed. Members of council, any questions for this evening? Councillor Harlan.
Thank you, Franklin. It was great. I may have missed it, but how long has the Archives been providing this tourism service?
As long as anybody can remember.
Really?
Your neighbour, the deputy mayor, can perhaps give you that.
I was in school. I did the tours when I was in school.
Really?
They've been going on that long. So
For
I
that
would say
long?
At least 40,
Okay.
50
Forget
years.
about your mic.
Oh,
It's okay.
40 or 50 years at least.
Okay.
So, and when we did our strategic planning, we said, well, okay, tourism, why are we doing tourism for the town? And we're not getting, it's a service, but we're not being paid for it. Our donors, our individual donors, some of whom are here, paying for the tourism service. And it's not just tourism service, it's the maintenance, the operation, and not the heavy maintenance, but the day-to-day operation of the courthouse and the old jail part of the archives. So it seemed to be reasonable to pull this out and say, well, this is what we're having to raise to supplement the grants that we get for students to run the tours and things. So this is the supplementary, the extra money we still have to find after finding the grants. So this is, as I said, a service we provide to the town, and we're happy to do it, but we think it's only fair to our individual donors who are supporting the archives for archive services. We think it's only fair that we should be approaching the town to say, hey, please help. And compared with the other properties that you run, as I've said, you know, you're budgeting wages and benefits for over $30,000 for the other properties and zero for the courthouse and zero for the jail itself.
Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you very much for your presentation as well, and also just for your tireless dedication to telling the stories of the community. I think there's nothing more important than making sure that we maintain and tell those stories. But I wonder if you can just help me see a little more about the relationship between the archives and the Beskoto Magadi community. Do you feel that there is good working together, and that the archives incorporates Indigenous stories and history and language as well? Or could there be a little more work to be done in that area?
I think that we could do a better job of that. The problem with the Indigenous stories is they're not documented, and we in the past principally dealt with documentation. And so basically our history as it is at the moment tends to start with the loyalists and what have you. As to relationships, well, Deputy Mayor Akaji has been leading member of the various associations and societies that led to the archives. And we are very conscious that we need to do more. I have been active myself in trying to establish the audiovisual bank, as I think you just mentioned. And we have some recordings there that we do have waiting to be published and put out on the web. But we also would like to do more in that direction.
Thank you very much.
Oral history is incredibly important, not only for the Indigenous community, but increasingly, we think, for us to preserve the stories of our citizens, such as Herb McGee, who was mentioned the other day.
Go, Councillor Ware, then Deputy Mayor Akaji.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just mulling the numbers through my head, and I know later tonight we'll be going through some budget numbers, but the town does put a substantial investment into, and I've only been on council 9 months, 8 months, something, into those two buildings. So it's not zero that we contribute to the...
That was just for wages and benefits. Wages and benefits, over 30,000 in the budget, right? And zero in for the courthouse, and zero for the jail. No wages and benefits, because we're doing it for you.
I could appreciate that, but to Councillor Ware's point, like when you get into like the Sheriff Andrews, I believe the province has operating for that. I know when you get in the Ross Museum, there's a trust that actually provides some income associated with that. I'm not saying that council shouldn't be by any means, but there's some outlying factors. And to Councillor Ware's point, when I went through our capital budget, the jail and courthouse together over the next 5 years is calling for about $270,000 in capital projects. So to your point, the municipality is giving a significant amount of money to these buildings and attentions, but nothing to the operation side, which is what this particular ask was for. But specifically for the jail itself, I noticed that there's sanitary, plumbing, and fixtures due in the next 5 years. There's exterior doors and interior stairs, and the water lines as well. So those three items alone for the jail would be about $70,000, to your point, which I can see. Any other member of council? I think Deputy Mayor, you're next.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Thank you, Mr. Carty, for a wonderful presentation. And you're right, I've been there probably as long as the tours have been going on. We did the tours of the courthouse. We've done plays there. We have met with the Beskoto Magadi people. We've had Ghostbusters there in the middle of the night. I mean, I've stayed overnight with them to find Thomas. So, I mean, there's a lot that's been done with the help of your volunteers. And many of the historians that have passed away that were very good historians and worked very hard to preserve it on a shoestring budget, which you continue to do. So I think bringing this presentation forward allows us to see the operational side, that you do need assistance, and I'm fully, for the archives, because I worked there for many years as a volunteer and then as a senior student that did the tours in the fall on the off season. So those sort of things, but being busy now, I don't get there as often as I'd like to, but I know that you have tried to reach out, and we have had some, not just Beskoto Magadi, but from out west, we had some Indigenous people that came here to do some recordings of the courthouse and to meet with the spirits that are there. So thank you very much for bringing that forward.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Heenan.
Mr. Cardy, as always, a great presentation. I always enjoy getting the nitty-gritty. I just have one quick question, and I keep rolling it around in my head that we call it the Charlotte County Archives. Do you request funds from other municipalities within Charlotte County? Because to me, it also involves when you represent Charlotte County Archives, that represents all of Charlotte County, not just St. Andrews. So I'm just wondering if there's ever any call to other municipalities for any donations to or any line item in their budget to the Charlotte County Archives.
Well, thank you for asking that question. I did mention in here that we've been approaching the Regional Service Commission, but the reason the request tonight is specifically for tourism services. Really, it's strictly for town of St. Andrews. The Archives does provide a regional service. It was a county-wide service, and it did include Macadam in an informal basis before. And now we're simply saying, well, basically, this is what we're providing. We're providing a service to Campobello, from Campobello to Macadam, St. Stephen to way over there. And this is exactly what we are doing. We made, with support of Mrs. Flamer, who put on a big lunch for regional mayors and officials a month or so ago. We made a presentation to them and said, we're providing you with a regional service as an archive, and we would appreciate you recognizing this and picking up this service in your budgets. And the initial feedback was that they needed to figure out what a policy was, which was a familiar and perfectly audible approach. But we will be pursuing the Regional Service Commission and thereby the mayors for all the municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to piggyback onto those comments, so the request was taken to the Regional Service Commission, and everybody weighed in. I was really, I guess you could say, aggressive on hoping to have a regional fund for some of these regional organizations. You know, in this particular case, as I previously mentioned from Councillor Ware's comments, the municipality of St. Andrews is over the next 5 years debating, that doesn't mean we're doing it, but over the next 5 years, $270,000 in capital projects that benefit this organization. And the hope would be out of some of these smaller asks, which is operational, your ask is not, compared to 270, very big. The hope would be that other municipalities within Charlotte County that are benefiting from the services contribute. But unfortunately, the decision was made, and I do respect it, that a policy should first be developed, and that'll be developed over the next year. So the reality is the Charlotte County Archives from the Regional Service Commission, best case scenario, wouldn't receive funds until 2025 anyway. So they won't be getting from the Regional Service Commission, based on that decision, any funds in 2024. I will say that I had a positive conversation with a mayor from another community, and I, not to put him on the spot, but he indicated that his community was looking to do a donation. I don't know of what size, but there is a little buy-in from other communities. I don't know if that's the case across the board. I've only heard from one thus far, but yeah, that's as far as the Regional Service Commission. I don't think really any organization should expect funds, but I will say that in the past, Charlotte County Ground Search and Rescue received funds, so it has been done in the past, just for everyone's notes. Any other questions? Councillor Neal?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Cardy. Just a quick question. I was wondering if the archives actually track the number of visitors throughout the season, or the number of organized tours you guys give?
Yes, we do, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. And the visitors we had this year, was 2,107, and we had donation receipts of about $3,400, casual donation receipts at the door. That's almost, not quite a doubling, but something like 80% more than last year. And of course the previous year was very limited because we were only open a little bit with post-COVID, and then the previous year was nil.
So we're recovering. We're back more or less where we were before COVID. Visitors in 2019, we had about 2,600. And so we're getting back there. And we would like, you've heard me say this before, many of you, but we think there's a lot more potential for that whole common area, for the courthouse and tourism, but it needs a little bit of extra effort that I mean, our main job is the archives. And so we have to, the people who support us as an archive, they need to know that their money is going to the archives. And that's why we sort of took this out and said, well, this is a service we're providing, not so much to the region, but really to the town of St Andrews. So please, can you help us? And it's not a big deal. It's not compared with, it's not too big a deal compared with the other properties. I know I really appreciate, and we did say we really appreciate the upgrades that the landlord, the town, has done on the properties recently, but that doesn't actually benefit directly the archives.
Councillor Harlan.
Thank you, Mayor Henderson. I think you do raise another issue, though, Franklin, which is that we as a council have not yet dealt with the whole issue of the courthouse. So we have a consultant's report that has provided some feedback on what we as potentially could do with the courthouse. I know the Heritage Committee is looking at that report and going to provide council with some feedback. But I do think that this discussion tonight is wrapped up in that discussion as well. And I think sooner than later, I think we need to make some decisions as a council in terms of how we're going to proceed with the courthouse.
Yes, I agree. If you were going to look at what you're going to do with the courthouse, part of it should be presumably provision of tourism services, presumably.
And potentially expansion of tourism services,
well, and
as you indicated.
Yeah, absolutely.
In many ways across this town. Thanks.
Thanks. Valid point, though, that is relevant. It's almost like this is almost going to always be year to year because we don't know what the long-term plan is on that. But yeah, I assume that'll be coming back soon because it's been a couple months already, hasn't it? That it's been.
Yes, Your Worship. Actually, it's on the agenda for tomorrow night's meeting for the Heritage Board.
There. See how quick you can get things done when you're mayor? Tomorrow. Any other member of council? All right, well, Mr. Carty, thank you again and again. That presentation, I know how much effort and time goes into that, so thank you very much. It's appreciated.
Thank you for the opportunity. We like to show you what we're doing.
All right, and the last funding request, but not least, would be Sunbury Shores, and we have Gerald McEachern joining us, so the podium is yours as well. Welcome, and thanks for presenting on behalf of Sunbury Shores.
Mayor and councillors, thank you for having me here tonight. A very short presentation. It's always interesting following the archives. I'll go minimalist for his, to follow up for contrast. We did have a video as a part of this presentation. We're not able to make the link to our website. For some reason, the connection won't happen tonight, so I'll just proceed. We're requesting $5,000 from the town. It's a rather modest ask, I think. When we first met with Paul and Chris, we were considering asking for $20,000 in support, which would have been about 10% of our operating annual budget. That was based on my previous experience with the Thunder Bay Symphony. With them, the municipality was putting in about 10%, probably a little bit more than 10%. They put in $236,000 a year for a $2 million annual budget. Our budget's $400,000, so you kind of get how we're indexing that. We see Sunbury Shores as one of the primary cultural hubs of not just St. Andrews, but Charlotte County, so it's an important asset. And we're entering our 60th year coming up in 2024. So this is a significant long-term investment, I think, both from the town's point of view and from volunteers' point of view. As you may know, the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony is recently folded due to ongoing deficits and funding shortfalls. And that was a real shock to the industry, the classical music industry across the country. It wasn't a surprise to me. Having run an orchestra for 3 years, its arts organizations are very, very difficult to keep going, and very often patrons, donors, and supporters in the community take them for granted. That may be true of archives and Katie's Cove as well. And we have riches in this community in terms of these assets, but they are difficult to keep going. So I understand your point in terms of the courthouse. How do we sustain these things? Just as reference, Mr. Carty pointed out that each of the 4 venues require about $30,000 in salaries. We have about 4 times that need to support our teachers and our staff. Over the years, about $120,000, which goes right back into the community. So Sunbury Shores is rather significant as a cultural forum for this community. We're doing all we can to keep it thriving, and we've been investing, quite a lot in terms of just bringing up the facility. It's governed by the people who live here and join as members. So like the other organizations, we are community owned. You may have seen me on the scaffolding painting with volunteers this summer to repaint the front of the building. We're doing the same sorts of things inside. We have 60 volunteers, 60 plus, more like 70, that rotate throughout the year helping us do our programs. So we have dozens of programs and really 2 shows a month. We have 20 exhibits a month. In addition, we have all the class programs and after-school programs that happen here in St. Andrews, and those go out throughout the region. I'd like to thank the council for the $1,000 grant that we received this year. That bought us the building supplies that are now building a digital media lab upstairs at the gallery at the center. So we have now, physical evidence of this happening, and it's really quite nice to see that happening from our point of view. The things that we wanted to show you tonight were 3 videos that you can see on our website. If you go to news on our website, you'll find the 3 videos. It's part of the Fundy Film Festival. This is a direct outcome of our strategy around developing new media and bringing younger people into our arts and cultural scene. The big push there is how do we engage younger people in what we're doing. We have a lot of emphasis on seniors and engagement in the community, and this is an aging community, but keeping kids in the region and keeping creative skills happening is also part of our mandate. So this new media is a way of taking that and moving that to students so they can access that, and that's students from St. Stephen, St. George, and St. Andrews. So it's a regional interest. We're asking you for the $5,000 to support our programs, primarily for adults and seniors in St. Andrews, and we have an All Aboard for Art program that's happening, and this grant money would go toward that and other programs like that coming up through 2024. This particular program offers 4 workshops over 4 weeks, some at Sunbury Shores, Bayside Community Center, and in St. George. So you see that kind of more regional spread happening in our programming. I said already that we are a regional cultural hub. We're really supporting the participation of seniors and newcomers because there are lots of newcomers coming into this area and looking for the kinds of support that we offer. So far this year, we've had just over 7,000 visitors and people engaged with Sunbury Shores, and that'll probably end up to around 10 or 11,000 people that we touch directly. We do keep accurate numbers, so this is something year over year we can go back and we record these with CADAX, so it's institutional behavior. We have interest from as far away as New York and Colorado for programs with acclaimed artists like Jordy Miller, Maggie Rose, and others. I don't know if any of you have been involved in that, but this dovetails into what Kira's doing, Kingsbury Gardens doing, and Huntsman. So we have that nice quadrangle of interests that happen in the community. Just today, we held our first art class for VMES students at our center, and that's part of our ongoing art training for students. And tomorrow we're holding our first after-school classes. So kids are engaged, ongoing, and we have those programs directly for parents in the community. That's all I have for you this evening. I look forward to your continuing support. Any questions?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all presenters being under 10 minutes tonight, so thank you for that, being clear and concise. Council, I'll open it up to you on this particular one. We'll start with Councillor Blanchard.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Just for clarification, is it a one-time request of $5,000, or is it a request for an ongoing support of $5,000?
I would like to see this ongoing support for Sunbury Shores from this town. We also have plans to reach out to St. George and St. Stephen in the relatively near future, and I think the new changes in how municipalities are governed here, affect our funding. But I think it's our intention to really have community support, municipal support for Sunbury Shores as a cultural asset.
Thank you. Any other members of council? All right. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. You got off easy tonight, eh? So I really appreciate it. And again, for all three organizations, council will be deliberating this as part of the budget process, and that'll be over the next, I'd say, probably 30 days. So thank you very much for all the presentations this evening. All right, council. We are now moving into the introduction, consideration, and passing of bylaws and motions. The only thing left on the agenda is just a small thing called the Town of St. Andrews 2024 budget. It does say draft 2, but in particular tonight, again, we are talking about capital as well as utility, which at the end of the day is primarily capital conversation as well. So I'll pass it over to Mr. Spear to lead this process.
Thank you, Worship. Can we take a 2-minute break?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Your Worship, everyone's returned back. I'm sorry I started the stampede, but we've returned.
Well, I appreciate the recess, everybody. So we'll call this back to order. And at this point, I will pass it back over to you for your Christmas. So go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. And I'll be really insulted if I hear snoring, Council. I'll tell you right off. Councillor Weir, I know you won't. You and I live for this type of stuff, right? So, Council, I will say, I gave you a lot of information in your package last week. Instead of trying to go through it all, we're going to go through the Asset Manager's Report. Will be part of the slideshow. So that's at the end of each section. The first one we'll look at is the 5-year general capital budget. I do have a slideshow as well to go with it before we jump deep into the numbers. But it's just, instead of trying to go through the longer budget numbers and funding right now, we'll just go through the projects that are up for discussion. So, as the Mayor said, this is a look. Last week we looked at the 2024 operating budgets, and now we're looking at the capital budgets for both the utility fund and the general operating fund. Council, I think there's going to be a bit of a reality check. This is a problem right across the province, is that with historically high construction cost and interest rates, that taking on a whole lot of capital may not be the best idea. And so what kind of administrators are saying is you've got to look at stuff that is needed as opposed to wants as much. Not to skip out wants, but it's just you really need to want it, not a passing idea. So, as you know, within the Local Governments Act and really within our mandate as local government, there's core services and soft services. Core services being plowing roads, fire trucks, policing, garbage removal, that type of stuff, and governments. Then you have what is used to be called soft services. These are the services people like, but they include things like recreation, heritage, culture. And so we've got to kind of focus what the mandate of the local governance is. And over the last few years, we've been very aggressive on recreation, which is a good thing, and the people really appreciate that. But it has been at the cost of our core services, meaning in-ground infrastructure, buildings. As you know, we spend a lot in this arena, but a 50-year-old building that would cost $10 or $12 million to replace is still going to require a lot of work over the next few years. And so I'm not lecturing you, but just trying to get your focus in on what you should be considering when you're looking at all these things. I'm concerned that there might be new cost responsibilities related to local governance reform. I don't know anything you guys don't, meaning I'm not hearing anything through the pipeline. But as you know, we haven't assumed the roads for now. but I've heard possibly, even at the UMNB, there's going to be a resolution discussed about that municipalities manage the roads on behalf of the government, that for some of them that's is a priority. They're different than us, but it would mean different equipment for us and things too. And so just to keep that in the back of your mind. From other provinces, they always say within local government reform, within the 5 to 10 years of local government reform and the amalgamation of the unincorporated areas, they turn over everything to the towns, to the new entities anyway. And so it's to be aware that within a 3 to 5 year window, we may have more responsibilities. And we're still working on the wharf. We think we're topped out at 7.8 million, but we could get a tender in, that's 8.5 million, possibly. What do we do? Do we not do it? Do we absorb it, etc.? So just as we're going through here, you'll see where there's opportunities that we could do it, but if we run up our debt load rate to the max over the next 3 to 5 years, we're not going to have much wiggle room going forward without substantial tax rate increases, which I don't think anyone wants to do right now in these economic conditions. So accounting 101, so each fund is still accounted
Chris, do you
for.
mind if I jump in there just
Yep.
quickly? I just wanted to hit that home because, we discussed it earlier today, but I am aware that we have a bigger council than before, but originally when the other 6 councilors got together, we did the priority setting exercise, and there were some big ticket items that came up. Obviously the wharf, kind of our hands are almost forced because pretty soon that's not going to be able to have any traffic, but we talked about housing, right? So even the decision before you with Compass Housing, that's a significant amount of money, right? So, and then we talk about the fire truck, obviously the ladder truck, very, very crucial stuff. But the reality is this council as a whole around this table, these projects haven't all been completed, but the debt is coming. We've made a lot of big decisions early on, and as such, we've almost committed a lot in debt as a result of that. So I think the reality check there is every year we can't have big shiny items, right? Like it's just the financial outlook doesn't work, and I think that's where Mr. Spears, speaking about is when you look at the interest rates right now and what we have to pay, it is not a good time to incur extra debt. It's just not, right? So that's the reality check that the nice to have. I have my own list. I even talked to them about nets behind the soccer field. Balls are going into the marsh, and maybe that's a small item. I don't know. But what I'm saying is we really need to be strategic on incurring extra debt. And I know we're going to get in the utility fund, and that has got some bells and sirens going off as is. So we're going to have some challenges there. But when it comes to capital projects right now, the reality check is it's with what we have committed out there, it's really hard to add more on. So I think we need to be very strategic about that. So I just wanted to reiterate Mr. Spears' point. So sorry to interrupt, Chris.
No problem, Your Worship. And I guess, Your Worship, maybe as we go through, I'm not sure if we want to wait till the end for questions or kind of address stuff on a slide-by-slide approach.
You're the presenter. What do you prefer?
It's whatever. It depends how long council wants to be here, I guess. But we'll go through. I guess as we present council, if you come up with a question after a slide or after discussion, maybe it's better than to
Let's
talk
go at
about
the
it.
end of each slide just in case, because it is 20 slides, so to wait that long for a question, it might be relevant to other stuff they hear later on, if that works for you.
So I guess, accounting 101. So it's really the only reason for that, as everybody knows, but so people at home know too, is that you've got the general fund, which is supported by tax dollars, and then you have the utility fund, which is supported by revenue. Except for very limited purposes, the utility has to pick up everything that's in the ground, so water mains, sewer mains, water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant, etc. The tax revenue is used for everything else. They're treated as 2 separate entities almost. It's just for debt profiling and all that. You borrow for them separately, and so it's important to keep them separate in your mind. Next slide, please. So the current situation, we have high interest rates of that, as you know, the prime rate's at 7.25. Luckily, we don't borrow that high ever. But as a note, in 2019, we had a 15-year debenture that had a 2.1% in early years and a 3.15% interest rate in year 15. I called today, and they were supposed to send me the figure, but didn't get to me before tonight. But it's about 2 points higher. So the fall debenture, that we actually have some money going for is probably going to be between 4% and 6% interest on a year-by-year basis. And that's like the lower rates in the first few years, and then as you go out, it gets higher. So that means we'll be paying 2% more right from the get-go. And when you're talking multi-million-dollar projects, that's a lot of money. So we do have some large projects on the go. We have the ladder truck, which we'd hope to have by now, but it's scheduled for November, I want to say now, next November. But it's $1.5 million, of which council already approved $900,000 to borrow. The rest of that's coming out of reserve funds. The wharf project has been approved. Well, I guess approved's the wrong word, but that we've budgeted $7.8 million for it, of 1.8 to borrow, and the balance coming from federal and provincial grants. Prince of Wales widening, we talked about, it's about 1.1 million, of which 675,000 easy to borrow from other, but we do have about the balance is due to a grant, about a third of it. And then trails. So trails, we get original grant of 1.5 million. We've only spent about 400,000. So we've got 1.1 million to go through hopefully this year, and then $367,000 to borrow. That borrowing was already approved by this council or maybe the prior council. In the general capital fund, we had $31 million in assets, which are original cost, and that's not depreciated. That was like the project cost. It's probably 4 to 5 times that in replacement costs, to be perfectly honest. It could be even high as 7 or 8 times. So if we were to build an exact replica of St. Andrews, it'd be well over $100 million just in in-ground. Sorry, that's not in-ground infrastructure. That's buildings, recreation facilities, town hall buildings, etc. So just to give an idea, right now we have about 2.2 million in long-term debentures, although we just approved a couple of months ago another, I think, $300,000 for a new debenture that'll come out in late November, early December. Our debt servicing was about $295,000, which is 5% of budget, which is considered very strong. And last year we had grants of about $560,000. In the utility capital fund, we have $21 million in assets. That's probably 5 to 8 times higher, just because it's a 70-year asset, so most of those.
Sorry to interrupt, but just wanted to catch you, because these numbers were from almost 10 months ago. Do you feel that these numbers are still pretty accurate, or that they've changed in any way?
What's that?
Like the numbers that in the general capital fund, the numbers that we've listed on the slide, they're from
So
December 31st.
they'll just be this year's purchases.
Okay.
So that was just, we won't know until
Right.
December, but
Okay.
it's close to budget except for the wharf.
Thank you.
We have about $3.1 million in debentures. It's worth noting that the debenture costs are a lot higher there. You know, when you put debentures versus asset, that you have less assets but more debt. The debt servicing is 17%, which isn't too bad. They will kind of let you go up to 50% without questioning it. Their actual philosophy is if you have service fees to cover it, they don't care if you go up to 99%. If your customers, being the water users, are willing to pay what's necessary to replace, that's okay by them. And that's going to have to be a serious discussion we'll get into later, because there's a need within that department for a lot of things. And again, it's only borne by water users, not by taxpayers that aren't on the water system, which especially under the expanded community is a significant population. And then we had $175,000 from the gas tax fund that was used for capital purchases in 2022. Now, I want to make this clear. Everything we discussed tonight is for discussion only. This is not our final recommendation. We've made a few cuts, but there's other stuff tonight we'll talk about. 2024 is really the most important, just remembering I've got a 5-year plan here in order to look at tax rates, to look at debt costs and things like that if we continue, but that every year we're going to be looking at least the next year and kind of laying out what we think the next 5 years are going to look like. And then, yeah, that's it. So we'll skip. So now we're going to talk about the general fund capital budget. And I'll be using these, as I discussed earlier before. Sorry, I didn't number the pages, but it's about 8 pages in. So under equipment and vehicles, the only department getting anything this year is the ladder truck. And again, it was ordered over a year ago, almost 2 years ago. It's in queue and should be ordered, but it's already been approved. PO's already been ordered. Its chances are, or we can't, take that out or cut that right now. For 2025, the sweeper truck, which we use a lot, is going to be due for replacement. We've been kind of holding it together with bubble gum and Scotch tape over the last couple of years, thanks to having a mechanic on staff. But it's something that's worth looking. To buy that unit new, you're probably looking at $300,000 to $500,000, but we're looking at $120,000. Public Works has to replace a half-ton. There's a 3/4 ton that has to be replaced, a couple of pumps. So you see next year, there's more units, but for about $500,000, $540,500 that are up to consideration. So I'd like to go to the transportation now, which is a couple of pages over. So our total budget for there is about $2.5 million, 2.445. One thing we have that I mentioned earlier is the trail expansions underneath there of 1.1. One of the projects that I'm going to say is worth discussing is the Prince of Wales. We've had that grant that was acquired, I think, early this year, and we've talked about it. One of the concerns was the trees along there, but it's a $1.1 million project, of which only a third is grant. And so the town taxpayers have to come up with almost $700,000 to pay for that. That does include some in-ground storm things, but in order to, you'd almost have to abandon any thoughts of creating an active transportation lane if you don't have it, to be perfectly honest. But then you have to off-balance that with the cost, and the fact we've invested so heavily in other trails throughout the last few years is that the way you want to go? Dock Road, we've talked about last week, but it was $15,000 for there down in the Shamcook area off the Glebe. And then the balance is parking and paving. Most of the paving is related to projects, in-ground infrastructure projects we did this past year. And then we're just putting on a seal coat. We put 2 coats on, a base coat and a seal coat, and just putting the seal coat on top of that.
I think I got a question here, Mr. Spear. Councillor Harlan.
Thanks, sorry. Prince of Wales, can you just help me understand, because this would have been in a discussion with the previous 6, the whole rationale around the widening of Prince of Wales is?
Sure. Well, it's probably one of the most walked routes in town,
Yep.
to be perfectly honest.
Yep.
People do the walk around the point, and it'd be a continuation really of Water Street. Someday we'd hope to do the point and go right down. Right now, if you have 2 cars, vehicles, yeah, and you're a bicyclist or a walker, you get an abandoned ship and get into the ditch or something. It's just, it's that tight. It's even tight if you have a Winnebago or something going along there, and then a car comes along with the branches and stuff. People are getting out of the way. And so this would really to add 1.5 meters of paved shoulder, plus redoing the additional paving on top. So it's not just the shoulder, but it's repaving everything, adding a storm drain where needed, and giving that additional, yeah.
Through your worship. So in addition to that, it's actually within the transportation master plan that was looked at creating an active transportation lane. And then beyond that, and as an addition, the school children do walk down to the park, and they do use the areas down there, and it was considered a safety discussion per council previously. So that gives you some extra background.
Thank you.
So just on this one, Mr. Spear, just for clarity, because it is about transportation, but expanding the length of the road. If this project was canceled, say, by council, you're not doing any work whatsoever on Prince of Wales, correct?
We could defer work. There's work that's going to have to eventually be done in the next decade, but if we're going to do the road, we'd have to expedite some of the water and in-ground mains that are already there.
So where I'm going with this one is it's not necessarily abandoning the active transportation, it's delaying it. So it doesn't mean that it will never happen. It just means it won't happen right now. And the other thing is the useful tree. There would be trees to do this project that would need cut down still, even with it this way versus the trail or the sidewalk, right? The other thing is those trees, we are told, are at the end of their life cycle. In 10 years' time, it might be a little bit more obvious than it is right now, because right now those are still beloved and appreciated trees right now in the community. So I'm not saying abandon, but it could delay if council decides that, because I think that whenever that work is needed to be done, I think that is going to be a worthwhile conversation at that time. And then I guess just because I'm in a savings mood is there is a grant on the table, so it's always hard when you have kind of a grant versus you don't know what the future brings. But there was the late Greg Thompson. A lot of you know him, and not in no matter what party you're on, but he always said that he always wanted a Lamborghini, but at 58% off, he still can't afford a Lamborghini. And really, that's what comes down here is just because we have a grant doesn't mean we necessarily have to do everything, because we have a limited amount of resources, so we really need to pick our priorities. So that is why I think Mr. Spear has identified that project, because the trail expansion, you've got almost, call it close to 75% dollars, but almost 70%. You've got a significant amount there, right? That makes that money, I guess, go a little further. So those are just a little bit of comments around Prince of Wales, just to add on to that. Councillor Neal.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just to clarify that again, so the work that we were planning for the in-ground infrastructure is not imminent right now then?
Correct. Only imminent if we were going to pave on top and didn't want to tear it up later.
Okay, thank you.
And to say it's in what we'd call satisfactory to poor shape, but not unusable shape. There's definitely things that are in worse shape around. And so it makes sense to tie it in all together in 1 year.
Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you, Worship. And can you remind me which grant that was?
It was the Active Transportation Fund through the federal government.
Can it be repurposed?
Through you, Your Worship.
For that?
Yeah, no, it was directly for that project. The fund is available for another 5 years, but hard to say if we would get approval again, just putting that in.
We appreciate the application, though. A lot of work to fill those out. Any other member of council? There's still lots of time for questions. Mr. Spear, continue.
And Your Worship, I'm kind of skipping over some of the stuff for other people's sake. Should I be a little more detailed, at least in the current year stuff, than I'm touching the highlights, or no?
I would actually say it's capital projects. I think more details probably appreciated, to be honest. And I know that essence of time, but.
Yeah, and so for the paving jobs this year, we're recommending Alexandra Crescent, which, as you know, that's a long stretch that was pretty much completely done this year we're in. Queen Street between Harriet and Mary and Champlain Avenue. And that amount is only if we actually do the work in Champlain Avenue. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then one project is the All Saints Church would like to partner with us to do the same type of parking that we currently have on Queen Street, now on Montague Street. So if you know, across from Sheriff Andrews' house, there's the off-street, the parking that's a little dip into the, extra wide paving there. And so have asked council to consider a section there, and our previous asset manager calculated he can do about 13 parking spots. And we haven't heard officially how much. They said they might be willing to share the cost with us. And so we'll get more details before we get down to this. The question was put out last week, and we'll go from there. Yeah, and that's all the projects, Your Worship, for under that particular subheading.
Thanks.
I'm going to skip the 2025 for now, Your Worship. A lot of that stuff is dependent on what happens in the utility budget, and so until we decide that, most of that could be delayed. So I'd like to jump to the next slide, Your Worship. And
the truth is, too, on 2025 is everything will be debated again anyway, right? So.
Yes.
It's good. It's good to look ahead to know what you're approving now, but in the same sense, 2025 will be thoroughly discussed in 2024.
So under Buildings and Structures Council, we have a relatively small year compared to other places. We have $180,000. So 20,000 of it, that little brick wall across from Tim Hortons, is basically falling apart. Just as an FYI, it could be shaped in that brick wall taken out. We put it in there, but if you think the brick wall is good aesthetically, great. But from a strictly engineering perspective, it could be removed and the ground sloped. The water would run over the sidewalk a little bit, but the sidewalk is also shaped to go to a storm drain. But there is $20,000 there. But right now, that a good sneeze would probably knock that wall off. We've got signs on it to ask people to stay off it. For Town Hall, the front railing needs to be replaced. It's basically rusting from the bottom. We've tried 3 or 4 different things the last 2 years, and going to stainless steel seems to be the only option there. We can keep continuing structurally. They're pretty good shape, but it's that rust that's happening and the cement and stuff that seems to be the problem. Shoreline protection on Chandler Lane. Need to add armor stone to the street end for $7,500. Centennial Park, so several years ago we replaced the building there, and we've got a great ramp there, but if you notice the ramp's extremely long and it's kind of falling apart. It was just treated with natural products over the years, and I'm going to say that was early in my time here, so it's probably 15 to 16 years old, and so we can replace that for about $15,000. The arena, $10,000 for plumbing upgrades. And the Ross Museum, the front walkway should be replaced for $4,000. For the arena, it's actually in here. That may be less because we bought some cameras this year, but we have $23,000. As you noticed, behind the tables, there's wires everywhere and stuff, and we're trying to pull those up. It is quite expensive for $23,000. Although that did include cameras, but the fire marshal wasn't particularly impressed with the tripping hazard, so it may be a need to do, not a nice to do in that case. With Bayside Community Hall, we talked about last week the main driveway, and we still have it listed as $52,000, or not the driveway, the parking lot, $52,000 there. Now the next one is for your consideration. So it's the switch the generators. So we have a generator here, as you know, to operate the EMO center, and then a generator at the water treatment plant. Well, the one at the water treatment plant is oversized, and what an electrician and other people have seen it have said is we should switch them. The reason being, in this building, the ice plant isn't hooked into the power. Now, we first did it, we said, well, who cares about the ice plant? Well, the problem is, if you have a power outage like this time of year or later in the spring, for a few days, that ice will disappear in 2 or 3 days, and you'd be a month getting it back just by the time it melts, drained, whatever. So I think actually in my budgets I put $18,000 in both funds, but it's for about $40,000 we can have those generators switched, and then this whole facility will be under power. Again, it's not to have hockey games during an ice storm, but it is in the event which happens of long power outages that we don't lose the ice for an extended period. So we happened a couple of 3 years ago. Luckily, it was very early in the season, but we were 2 weeks letting the ice melt and cleaning it out and then putting in the next layer. It's that time consuming. So I think it's a good suggestion, but it isn't exactly cheap, and that's mostly labor, to be honest. Labor and floating it. We already have the generators, which are over $150,000 a piece in today's dollars.
What does it, Mr. Beer, what does it usually cost when you have to do that whole process of taking the ice out and putting it back in? I know that there's some fixed costs, but is there a rough estimate to what it costs to put ice in?
Well, we have 5 guys that work in about 7 or 8 business days all day, plus the cost of paint, which is another $1,000 per sheet. So, you're talking a couple of $1,000.
Plus lost revenue.
Plus lost revenue, and, the kids, if it happened, even in December, something mid-season, that doesn't necessarily mean it's all that cold out. And it's just, you know, it doesn't take long. Probably 24 hours we're okay, but beyond that, even if a little bit gets wet, there's, you know, it's hard to refreeze. It won't look right. You have to kind of reshape it and stuff. So that's the thoughts. Honestly, Council, we never thought of that several years ago when it was put in, but that's our staff's thoughts, and based on a commercial electrician's recommendation, he said you guys really should consider switching them, but.
Thank you.
Then for the next year, there's some more arena stuff, including the dehumidifier. The town office, Age Friendly always has $10,000 a year. In 2025, the electrical panels are quite old here, and this is just phase one of 70,000, just so you know what this building will continue talking about unseen costs. And these costs were probably from 2 years ago. That 70 could be 100 by the time we go to bid. Then the fire hall needs some work that we originally hoped had done 2 or 3 years ago for about $32,000. Following Mr. Carty's discussion tonight, we still have a power issue, not issue, but a power replacement down there that has to happen. It's about $14,000. We don't have a dollar amount. We have in the Indian Point that related to climate change. So for the other councillors to know, or the newer councillors, sorry, our main sewer main goes almost around the outside of the road there, and if it goes on, you know, within 30 or 40 years, if it's underwater, that sewer main will be underwater. And so there's a hope to raise it. And I've seen a bid 3 or 4 years, or estimate, and I think it was $600,000 to raise that road. And then another couple $100,000 to run the sewer main. You have to dig out the sewer main. That's something that's important. But we have it for 2025. That was originally discussed. That obviously I don't have any money there, and we can push it forward for now. A lot of it depends on discussions with the Beska-Makutati too, because we realize it's their property. We don't want to, or you know, and they're interested in it, and we don't want to do anything out there without their agreement. There's a few other things on here in 2025, like replacing flooring in the dining room. Replace the red concrete aprons do have to be replaced, and the Ross Museum, the front steps. So there's some things that this is based on the asset management report more on time than anything, and so some of these things can probably be delayed. But again, this is a 2-year out project that we'll have a discussion with. The next one is storm mains.
Quick question, if I'm going to
Yeah.
interrupt again. A lot of them like replace plumbing, stuff like that. You see the arena. One of the ones that jumps out in 2024 is skate sharpener. Is that something that we're looking to get in service through a rec director? How does that work?
Well, yeah, we haven't figured out where, but it'd be staff operating it. We've realized that there isn't local sharpeners anymore, so this is automated. It's not like the grindstone that somebody has to sit at. It's not completely automated, but it's not one of those ones some of the arenas used to have where you threw $2 in it and set your skate in it. This has to be done by hand by somebody. And we do have a thought, at the far end of the front area of the arena, we used to call the minor hockey room. You know what I mean? That you pass the second set of bleachers, there's a little area there. It's a small closet, and minor hockey hardly uses it. That's probably the ideal location for it. But could be there, could even be a service in the canteen if we find an operator there. So it's a small piece of equipment, probably the size of these desks on the table by 8 or 9 inches high. And so we think it'd be good. There's been a request for it. It'd be revenue generating, but not not to buy the next version of the arena or anything. But, I think it's $7 to $10, if not mistaken, to go to Canadian Tire, for instance, to get your skate sharpened. And so, to be competitive and saving people have been asking for it. We'd be glad to pay for it.
And the other one is the council chamber, so the elimination of wiring.
Yeah.
Is that really the quote of what that would come in at? Because I know nothing about it. It just seems.
I think the cameras are over half of it.
The cameras are part of that. It's not just wiring.
Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say that seems extremely high for tucking wiring in essentially through walls, right? I'm in the wrong business if that was all. Yeah, because it's saying eliminate trip hazards, 15,000. So that seems, again, I know nothing about it, but it just seems like a lot of money for eliminating this wiring.
Part of the problem is, Your Worship, is stuff has to be moved around because this is a concrete slab under, so it's not as simple at a house where you can drill it into a floor and go into your basement. You got to kind of run things into poles or through ceilings or something, so it's going to be a little harder than thought, but Patrick's up for the challenge, I know he is.
Thank you.
Whether he wants to be or not, I guess. Sorry, is there any more questions on Building and Structures Council? For storm mains, the Thomas Avenue area, as you know, has had a lot of issues in the past. It has gotten better, but we noticed one that continuously backed up, and we got a special machine that goes into it and bores the roots out. But it means all it does is take out the roots that are there. It means the base of the roots is still in the main and breaking it. So that one is highly recommended. It's done better, but it'll alleviate a lot of problems that they've been having through there over the past few years. And the next year, there's nothing proposed at this time, and then maybe look at Augustus Street. We're kind of stuck, well, not stuck. Our philosophy really is when water mains have to be replaced on a street and there is no storm, then we add storm. And so that'll just be kind of the way it goes. So in the future, you'll only see storm when the water mains or sewer mains are going to be replaced on a street. And I don't know the exact numbers, but I think about wherever there's water mains and sewer mains in town right now, that only about 60% of them have storm mains. So there's substantial, a lot to go. And there is some money for separating storm out of the sanitary system, but Mr. Knopper and I can work on that, go in the future. St. Andrews Market Wharf. So between the 2 years, for me, it was close my eyes, make a guess, and see what happens and when the timing is going to be, because a lot's going to depend on what project we choose and when it happens. I've been telling everybody, you know, that my thoughts are that if we're going to do this project, it probably won't start till late September, early October of next year, and then go forward. So overall, it's about $7.8 million. And there's public consultation coming up, discussions with the mayor. We're looking at October the 30th. There's some, I'm sorry to make you meet every Monday this month, but there's some slides and stuff that have to be put up and things, and I'd like to put them on boards and stuff that can be put around, not just visual or just not electronically. So it's going to take a little bit of time. But in addition, and that's just kind of for the general public, I still plan on meeting with some of the key stakeholders in smaller groups over the next 4 to 6 weeks, and we'll get a better idea of what everyone feels. And they're all aware of that. And we might even have a chance to meet at the annual general meeting of the BIA and Chamber of Commerce, meet jointly in November, and tentatively the mayor and I are going to go there and discuss this project to get further input from them. Something that's not in this budget, in the asset manager one I did put in the dollar budget, was the $225,000 for housing. Technically, it's not, I put it there as a project. It's actually an operating cost because it's an economic development grant, not a capital. But I wanted to bring it for your, for you to remember. Right now, it's a committed amount that we've signed contracts. And so depending what happens in next week, I think it is, so the 19th, really that's committed for the time being. And you know, that we have to do that. So there's a bunch of new requests, all that are worthy, but we wanted to bring it to you. And when I say new, these are kind of things that are additional assets, if you will. The big ones that I've got listed on the slide is the video sign. I think it's important, but to remind, well, not to remind everybody, but years ago we talked this with the previous council, and they hated the thoughts of an LED sign in St. Andrews to put it, so council have to get around that. It isn't allowed by our sign bylaw right now. So that would have to be amended or get a variance from PAC or something to do it. But it's something that's missed. We could probably find something like the old number ones that they used to have at the bottom of the sign, but this is 2023. There's a lot more. There's even the potential if everyone can get their head around the LED sign, the big TV style, you could even potentially sell advertising on it to help pay for it. I'm not talking a lot, but please come to the Red Herring for burgers and fries for 20 seconds or something, and whatever. So there is an economic model to help pay for it. I think it'd be worthwhile, especially with Mr. Henselpecker and all the stuff he's doing, and people have mentioned they've missed it. But it's just trying to figure out how to do it best so it's not also so physically demanding of staff to put out the hand letters and numbers. Your Worship, sorry?
Yeah, no problem. I could add on to that. So the situation with the previous council on that one is it is contrary to our sign bylaw. So the dilemma that the previous council said is it's do as I say, not as I do. So you can't have one, but we can, and that was kind of the mentalities. And Mr. Acton, I recall back then, did an extensive search for a similar sign where they could actually do the old school letters that the arena staff used to put up all the time. And due to technology, it's not something that you can easily get anymore. He looked high and low, and he couldn't find, anything that wasn't just one of those portable ones that you pull out by the side of the road to have a nice sign. I'm sure he spent hours looking, and he couldn't find anything that was relevant to that. So that's a little bit of the background on why that decision was made at that particular time. But with that being said, an argument could be made that it's the community board and there's one allowed, and it's the community board, right? So over to you, but that's where that one was left off.
Correct. I'll talk about the rest individually, but I'll go through what's on the list. So Public Works is asking for a half ton for $40,000. As you know, we've added staff over there the last few years, and the problem is now we have to have one of our staff members act as a taxi for the other extra members. And so it's, is a decrease in efficiency. And so they'd really like to have another half ton that people, they can load their trailer with mowers if they need be, and, whippersnippers and shovels and all that stuff. Because I asked them, well, what about even similar to the Ford Escape? We've got something like that. But same thing. He says, well, we just have so much stuff we got to put in it. It's dirty. You really need a truck. They originally asked for new, and I kind of put a kibosh to that one. I couldn't believe how much a new half-ton cost now. A couple of 3 years ago, they were $50,000. Now they're $75,000. I just about fell over. So I think that's important, but it is a new asset, and it will make everyone a little more efficient. The fire department does have the scuba or SCBA there for $19,500, but that's being covered by the Dunn Foundation. That was approved 2 or 3 weeks ago. The outdoor movie system. So I told Mr. Henselpecker, give me your best shot, what you'd like to see put in. And then he did, and then I had to move stuff around a little bit to convince you guys that it's worth having. But I think the outdoor movie system is very useful, and it's been popular in other communities. Essentially, it's a blow-up thing that allows them to put up a screen and then have a projector system that'll show movies. We haven't quite identified where to put them yet. We've talked about both Centennial Park or possibly even the courthouse, the Commons. Both have pluses and minuses, but if council's okay with buying that, then we'll bring, recommended locations for it. And then again, it would just add after supper entertainment for the community. And even in summer, once you get kind of past 7 o'clock at night, it's a little bit quiet in this community. It'd be nice for people that they get an ice cream, get a treat, and then roll over somewhere else, one of our own assets, and do that. So that's what the outdoor movie system is. The dog park, there's going to be, some of that will be spent this year, but we're kind of matching their funds, $20,000 to $30,000, and that would be for signage, some gravel and things, and just a little bit of work on the property. Then I call the miscellaneous, but so other things that he looked for was a silent generator, which the deputy mayor had one at the Truth and Reconciliation Day. It's very useful. It'd be to use the movie system for one. That wasn't a silent generator? Okay. We'll get a silent generator that really works, and for $4,000. For the Bayside Community Hall, we have the heat pumps, but they actually were approved, well, probably through the granting, they're on the table to be used. Something that Public Works would like to buy is a plate compactor. So what this is when they're putting material on the road, it's to pat it down. And right now, they have that little roller, but we don't have a trailer to move it. So as you can imagine, that thing doesn't move really fast. If you have something in the Thomas subdivision or outside the plat, it's going to take someone an hour just to move it from the Public Works yard. So this is a lot more efficient. For certain things, the roller's better, but this would allow for smaller potholes and things to be corrected. Roof flashing at the Ross Museum would just be a good idea. They're for $10,000. Skate sharpening for $5,000. That the mayor already identified that. The Indian Point washrooms, we will have those decided. Right now, the plan is to have that paid out of the tourism accommodation levy money we have. So before Mr. Hughes left, he actually put out requests for quotes for 2 or 3 contractors, so hopefully they'll get back to me in the next couple of weeks. And hopefully by December, we'll have enough information to award it and hopefully have it built over the winter as best we can. The exercise park, we need 3 mats, basically big rubber mats for some of the higher stuff, so if people fall off of them, it's like an outdoor rubber mat that's going to absorb the fall over the brick that's currently there. And then something I think is important is we don't have a decent fire alarm system at the Public Works garage, and I think we should invest in that. We had looked at fire suppression for both that and the fire department, but those are $300,000 per location, so it was extraordinary. It doesn't say it wouldn't be a good investment, but at least the fire alarm. I always say to people that Town Hall, most of our stuff's electronic now. If it burnt down, we'd go and buy 20 new computers and be pretty much up and running in 2 or 3 days. Not 26 new computers and up and running 2 or 3 days. But Public Works, with all your trucks in there, you'd be shut down for a year and a half if that place burnt down. So it's, maybe we want to look at fire suppression in the future, but at least the alarm system. Then other items, those are already in for this year. There's other items that we call deferred, so these were requested, and I just said a hard no, but unfortunately I'm very soft because I said yes to 220 and only no to 55,000. But there's leaf blowers for 8. We've had more than usual complaints this year for the the gas blowers as they go up and down the front streets, kind of clean up. It's not something you can do later in the morning because you're then competing with staff, but when you're blowing stuff at 6 and 6:30 in the morning, there's some of the residents and tourists aren't real happy. So that was the hope for that. Back to Mervyn, he had also asked for a portable stage and portable bleachers. Our bleachers have been here longer than I have, and so they're quite rough shape. They're hard to move. These other things basically are foldable, but the stand bleachers was $24,000 and the stage was $15,000. With the stage, we think, depending on what direction council wants to go, we can move it in and out of Market Square, as opposed to what we did this year, where we had to set it up once because of all the time commitment. So this is essentially be something on a trailer with stands that you could drop and go. We did say about an e-bike or an e-trike for the bylaw enforcement officer, but that may be wishful thinking, not a great idea for bylaw enforcement to drive an e-bike. Then Public Works also asked for a battery cutoff saw, kind of the same thing. They are noisy, and even if you're later in the day, we're doing some jobs around public facilities, it reduced the sound of that. And it does make it more portable, because sometimes they have to do things, away from electrical connections, and instead of running, 150 feet of cords, they can do their work and be out of there. But again, that was just a progressive thinking to try to get that done. I will note, right now, the e-versions or the electric versions of these things are about twice as much as the gas-powered. So what I've presented for you just in the general capital fund council, we have purchases of close to $7 million. funding from tax revenue, so after we pay for all the operations, we have about $690,000 of money left over to be put into that. But $1.467 million in borrowing. The grants of $2.7 million, and thank you, Mr. Knopper, for digging high and low, so it kills us both when we have to say to cancel some stuff, but we still go. And then right now our reserve fund is built up, but the reserve fund doesn't magically build up. We've just saved some stuff, and as we start to spend it heavily, it will disappear. But I'm proposing to use about $704,000 out of that this year to pay for our projects. And just to reiterate that when we did the budget the operations budget, we did base it on 5% revenue growth. And so this would allow us to do all this, assuming the 5%. I will say late last week I did get the new numbers. I said I thought it would be between 8 and 10%. It's slightly over 10% of what our assessment base is growing. So that'll be filled in on the next full version of the budget. Any questions on the general capital fund?
I guess it's a little bit of next steps on this. I know we keep going through everything very high level and we're not making any decisions. Kind of with your reality check at the beginning, and I guess I want to get a little bit of a consensus from council because of how much some of these projects that we're doing are costing the town. Your direction on need to have versus nice to have, it really hits home with me right now, because if the wharf is $1 million over, which could easily happen, this municipality's on the hook for that extra $1 million. So I'm very, very hesitant to go on a big shopping spree right now. And I'm not saying that these aren't worthwhile projects, but I'm really, really hesitant to spend a lot of money right now, knowing that we've got one of the biggest infrastructure projects, arguably in the history of the community, approaching us. I'm just wondering, council, for myself, what I would actually like to see, and I know that you had to take feedback from everybody, right? And departments and counselors. What I'd really like to see is almost a budget scrub saying, this is what we have to do. This is the nice to have list, right? And seeing what that bottom line is. That's where my personal head's at, but I don't know if everybody, but if staff did that scrub and came back to us and said, this is the list, and also this is what we decided not to, council could have the opportunity to say, this is what we're passing on. Is there anything here that we really think should be done? And look at the actual, this is what has to be done. And for me, with this wharf project commencing in 2024, going into 2025, that's personally where my thoughts at, because we have been doing some significant projects in this community. I don't know if council feels the same way I do, but I thought I'd generate this conversation to kick it off. Any comments on what I just said? I guess Councillor Ware.
I might as well start off. Mr. Spear gave his reality check. I spent an hour this afternoon preparing a little speech in my mind on that. But anyway, he beat me to it. No, I think with all of these projects, with the budget itself, the operating budget, whatever it is, we have to have a reality check. Every 5 to 6 months, we've got to sit down and look at it. And we keep talking about new initiatives. Well, someday the new initiatives, are going to drive us just to the point where we can't afford it. The assessment base is up 10%. For a lot of us, our personal assessment base is up 10%. So if the tax rate doesn't go up at all, we are going to get a 10% increase in taxes. And, that's going to happen to me for the next 2 or 3 years. I don't know how long it goes on, but I think there's quite a few of us in that boat. So I think we have to take that approach on almost everything. Do we have to do it now? I have a concern with what's under the ground. I think most of the cities and towns in eastern Canada have the same problem. They're old enough that what's under the ground is a question mark. And we don't know when we're going to get major breaks. And it's in the middle of the winter. You fix it, but you don't fix it as well as you do in the middle of the summer. So there's just so many things go into it that we really have to bear down, be fiscally responsible and do the reality check on a regular basis.
Thank you. I'm glad I saved you some speech. I'm glad Mr. Spear did too. Thank you, though, Councillor Ware. Anyone else on that one? Councillor Harland.
Thank you, Mayor Henderson. So yes, I would really like to have some recommendations from staff in terms of what is absolutely essential and what can be deferred. And I really would like to understand what could be deferred for how long. Like, are we talking next year? Are we talking a couple of years? So I know you had talked about Prince of Wales Street and the widening of that street, and that potentially could be a project that could be, or I understood from the conversation that could be deferred. Did I fall asleep during Van Horn Trail? Did we discuss that at all?
I didn't, not really deep discussion on Van Horn Trails. Okay. I'd mentioned that we had 1.1 million left in the budget. The council approved, yeah, well, that's right. So the council had approved from Bar Road to Cemetery Road, a long trail earlier, and then we deferred the construction until the spring because we thought the fall was, and then they had come up with 2 or 3 other projects that they'd like to do. There was a presentation earlier tonight that they wanted an additional to that. We didn't have enough money for the ones we already had, but we'll have a trail committee meeting coming up in the next few weeks and then have a further discussion on that.
Okay.
But, so Van Horn Trail, we kind of have a plan for that already that council had approved September, I'm going to say, and then we're waiting until, into the new year before we put it out to tender.
Right. But those would all be things that could be revisited, correct?
Absolutely. We'd have to technically award the tender for them even, right? Like depending?
Well, I don't, not to scare anyone who's watching, but if we canceled the next continuation of the Van Horn Trail, we'd save, I think, $300,000 or $400,000 in additional borrowing. We have borrowed a little bit, but we only get it as we do projects. And so, is that a core service? It's an important one, sure, but is the town going to have to shut down without it? No.
Right.
There's alternatives to the Van Horn Trail. The fire truck is a core service, that has to stay on the table. Plow trucks aren't in this budget, but plow trucks have to stay on the table.
Right.
But I wouldn't say almost no recreation thing, it would fall under need to stay on the table.
Right.
But just noteworthy as well, I know when you get into Prince of Wales, it was about 40% funds, these we'll call it trails, but that was what, close to 70, 67, what was the percentage that we have from external funding partners?
418,000 versus out of 1.1, so it's about, we'll say 40% is a nice number.
That's sorry for Prince of Wales.
Yeah.
But the trails is higher.
The trails is, we pay for a third and other partners pay for 2/3.
So there's more external funding there. If we're looking to expand the trail system, it'll be hard to do it any cheaper than that, that's for sure. But again, have to have versus nice to have, we'll have to weigh it all out, right? And I will say that just on those comments that I said earlier, there's some projects, I'll pick a couple random ones, I wrote them down, but like the dog park, we committed to them that if they raise the money, we would match it. Like, to me, those are commitments. Mm-hmm. The washrooms, that is coming out of the tourism accommodation levy, which needs to be spent for tourism. We've already cut the trees down there. So there is some projects like that we've already said, hey, we're doing it. But anything that we haven't said we're doing, then I think it should be open for discussion.
And your worship, sorry.
Go ahead and then I'll go to council.
Yeah, well, we talked earlier at council, we get, I think, between $122,000 and $135,000 a year for the tourism accommodation levy. You could earmark that money towards repaying the wharf debt. That would help a lot. I'm not saying it's a good recommendation, but it's something that could be considered. That, you've got this money using for tourism development. I think the wharf falls underneath that. It's just an idea at this point, not a hard recommendation.
But, and I'll go to you, but on that comment, it is worth debating. And maybe not all of it, but it's certainly worth debating because that is a tourism product that the taxpayer of St. Andrews, and I know it's other things, but that the taxpayer of St. Andrews is paying for, and if we have a ability to collect funds from visitors and put it towards that to save the taxpayer of St. Andrews, I think it's a worthwhile debate. To see every dollar go and not be able to do anything over the next, I think that's a tough argument, but for us to debate should a portion of that, I think that's a healthy conversation this council should have. Councillor Heenan, I haven't forgot about you.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I really see 2024 as a public safety budget, and that includes the wharf and anything that has to do with like ramps, et cetera, that has to do with public safety. I really feel that that's my priority. If we're going to follow through with the wharf, and the wharf is a public safety issue, because we're soon not going to have one, fairly soon. And if we're going to have a wharf, we have to make sure that it's done correctly. And as our mayor said, it could go over budget, et cetera. I just think that we really have to concentrate in 2024 of public safety. And that includes having a good wharf. If we have an issue, like I'm just using as an example, I would say like the $6,000 of the matting for the exercise park, that has to do with someone's safety. So I would like to see 2024 as being a public safety budget, more so than a needs and wants. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Heenan. All right. So does anyone feel contrary? I'd really like to see that, what that, I'll call it a scrub, what that budget scrub looks like. And again, what we committed, what needs to be done. And, even if you want to put another section of these are projects that they're nice to have, but we really think they should be done, I'd like to see those too. But this budget was kind of, I think, and you said that, I think, when we originally discussed it, you were just putting everything in there and then we've got to scrub it. I think that the first scrub should be done by staff, because you know a lot more about the assets than this table does. No disrespect to myself and all of you. I'd really like to see what that looks like, and then we have a conversation, because we do know that everything in this document, and you knew that too, we weren't and we can't do, right? So let's have a cleaner look. It's good to see all the asks and all the projects and understand them, but to me, I think that's where we're going to really get into the nitty gritty to get to, I guess, closer to maybe what you call a final draft, or at least a rough draft. Councillor Michelle.
Thank you, Worship. I'm a bit late to the party. Sorry, I was away all summer and missed it. So
nice beard, though.
It's not a criticism, but I was a bit disappointed not to see any money earmarked for parking downtown and parking time limits being enforced. I know that in terms of how fast things happen, when I first started on council, I don't know how many years ago it was now. Would it be seven or how many years have we been on?
You can almost call it 8.
Yeah, almost 8. So the very first priority I had was to look at parking downtown. It took 5 years to get the transportation study. The transportation study made recommendations that we look at implementing pay parking downtown, perhaps through the hotspot system, or there were different systems that could perhaps break even and maybe even generate monies for us. So I was a bit disappointed not to see it on there, and the transportation plan is part of the municipal plan. So maybe next year we could look at having pay parking downtown be something that we look at. Certainly when we do this scrub, perhaps staff could make some projections as to whether that's something that might break even, because we continue to have people parking downtown using for many days, weeks, leaving their cars in spots. And of course, I wasn't around to see it all summer, but you're still seeing it now, staff parking in front of their shops, and people not having no regular turnaround of cars like you should have in a business district. People come and people go. People don't just come and stay and then wander off and come back in a few days and get their wheels. So anyway, that's my quick 2 cents. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Gubishal. I can confirm that the challenge of parking downtown did continue this summer. In fact, we added a temporary parking spot in front of the drugstore because there was a car that was left there for over a week, right at the #1 spot for people to park to get their prescription. So it still is ongoing, to your point.
Just quickly, so if we could just, is it something that could break even perhaps in year one or even be close to breaking even? Maybe it could be part of the budget for this year.
Thank you. I know we discussed this in the past, and I think council consensus was they did not want to get into paid parking just for the impacts it would have on the downtown. And I do note that you're 100% right. That would help control parking, and it would pay for, I'm confident pay for itself. Like Bar Harbor, it's actually a revenue generator for them. But I think the discussion, but that would have been probably before we had the 3 new councillors maybe at the table. Or the previous council, I don't remember, but we did. It was this council, and the consensus was that we weren't going to do paid parking downtown because of the effects that it would have on it. We kind of, if I remember the debate, it was when we put up the no parking for one summer, people almost lost their mind, a big percentage of the population. So I think people are really skeptical to put paid parking. But with that point is talking about finances and funds and challenges. I don't know, maybe just for discussion on that, does someone want to hear more about that, or is that just something that you kind of feel that would not work in downtown Sarah? This is paid parking in the downtown core. Just quick consensus. How many would be entertaining to have that discussion? Show of hands. Just to okay. And how many would prefer not to enter into that whole discussion? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's majority still doesn't support it. So I appreciate it. And again, just to take us down, Deputy Mayor Akaji.
I was in St. John, and they have the paid parking, correct? And I spent 20 minutes trying to get to pay so I wouldn't get a ticket. It doesn't take money. You can't use your debit card. You have to have a credit card. It took me about 4 tries, and I'm not computer illiterate. It took me 4 tries before I got it. But they were saying that some of these have been vandalized when they have money in them with the people downtown. So that's why they went to paying with your credit card, so that there was no money in the box itself, so it wouldn't be vandalized. So I think when you look at putting parking boxes down there, there's got to be an easy way of doing it. I know you're talking about hot spots and stuff, but for some seniors, they don't access the hot spots. And some seniors, I prefer to do it with my Interact card rather than my Visa card, but luckily I had my Visa card. And the other thing you have to know is your license plate number, so make sure you have that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think at this point, should we move on just in the essence? Oh, sorry, Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you. Just a quick question, just procedural question. If we've already moved something up and it's passed through council, how do we bring it back to the table? What's the procedural mechanism for that?
Yeah, go over to you, but it depends on time frame is one thing, and then it's a little different than normal vote, so go ahead.
So time frame, generally speaking, if a decision's been made by council, it's 6 months before you can bring it back up. But if you had a motion and a seconder and 2/3 of council supporting it, then you could bring it back for discussion.
It used to be unanimous, but we changed that, right? Because unanimous is tough to do, especially with 9 people.
Just a reminder, Council, too, we've been slowly working on vehicular manslaughter. Vehicular bylaw.
Don't work on that. Don't work on that.
Don't give you guys chances. Sorry, the vehicular bylaw, and well, that'll come up, and you can kind of look at that whole discussion with that too. How time limits, whether it's a hard time limit and you're ticketed, or it's a paid time limit, and if the longer you stay, the more you pay. But that discussion will come up hopefully before Christmas, if not, certainly into the new year.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up on that? It seems like that's leading into something. Go ahead.
No follow-up at all, but I just wanted to further, talking about paid parking, I know I put my hand up in support of it, but I want to open the door that it doesn't always have to look like what we assume it might look like. There's always the option to explore a lot of different options and how that might work, and I'd like us to sort of maybe someday think of the consideration of how do we make that work. It just doesn't necessarily mean everyone has to pay all of a sudden, or we adopt the St. John model for it, because I agree it's frustrating, especially when you have to park half on a snowbank and then try to get to the machine, you slip and fall. And so, yeah, I've been down that road too. So, yeah, but it doesn't have to look like that, and we can be creative in terms of how that would work for our community and finding the right approach for our community too. Doesn't necessarily mean it's what we think it might mean.
Yeah, I agree, and I think at the UMB conference, we actually, and the exhibitors had an example of how it doesn't look like your standard system. It can be a little bit more modernized, but with that being said, I can understand that the technology barrier could be significant for some, enough to intimidate them from going to our downtown. So you are right, there's multiple ways, so we should always keep the eyes open. I will say that if someone has a really good suggestion, even though 6 months, I think if there's a really good idea, I think this council's open enough to say, hey, send it out to us, and then we can quickly check to see if we want to revisit it, just like we did today. All right.
Your Worship, can I just add a couple of little comments on that?
You can, absolutely.
For those that are attending the UMB at the end of November, I'm sure they'll be there. I think it is called Hotspot. They're usually there, and they did a presentation early this year about it. The one thing, though, Councillor, that in my own mind I thought was going to be self-defeating was we talked, well, local people in the community can get free passes and stuff. Well, you know, at the end of the day, during the height of traffic season, it's locals and businesses are congesting down there as much as tourists, and so it might be self-defeating anyway. If it's either everybody or nobody, or it's not going to work in my mind. And unfortunately, we don't have enough data to support any of that. But as Councillor Gumashel has said, going up and down and knowing the people in town and the vehicles they drive, you can identify whose is whose and think, well, to get rid of them, so to speak, off the front street, you're going to have to put full pay, in my humble opinion. I'm not recommending full pay, but to really make it work, you'd almost have to go with that in order to get traffic off of the downtown core.
Thank you, Mr. Spear. All right. I just want to keep this, I appreciate it, but then we're kind of going down a side path here. I want to put us back onto the utility capital fund budget. I do think that based on our conversation this morning, this might be fairly quick, though, based on what your recommendation is,
Right.
But maybe
it's
I'm
a
wrong.
shorter conversation because there's a
Thanks.
lot less elements and a lot less money. So when you have less money, it's easier to spend it.
Sorry, I'm going to ask one last final question, just so that I have a sense of it. Looking at the 5-year plan for the arena, and not to question it at all, but just so that I have an understanding of the cost, it looks like maintenance is around, and I just eyeballed it for 5 years, about $1.3 million. Does that buy us time, or does that actually look like a repeating 5-year maintenance for the building?
Well, the arena's 10 years ago, I would have said the arena was on a tick-tock, but various councils, including yourselves, have made significant investments in it, and the new compressors, ice surface, a whole bunch of stuff. And so the main issue was the ice plant. The main structure is in pretty good shape. A new roof was put on here 5 or 6 years ago, so the building's in relatively good shape. The plumbing is very old. As you know, if you go into some of the old public washrooms, it's, reminds you of stuff you saw as a kid in the 70s or 80s, depending on how old you are, or 40s. But nonetheless, most of that stuff can probably be addressed as money permits and time permits. I will say that the Dunn Foundation has been excellent about supporting, and maybe we kind of looked at new projects this year, new things. But if we said to them we'd like to refurbish what we have and bring it up to date, that would probably go a long ways too. So if you'd asked me 10 years ago where I thought the arena would be in 10 years, I said it was a flip a coin whether it be open or not if councils would invest. But councils made the choose to invest, and I think we're good for decades now, to be honest.
Thanks. And just to add on to that, even almost 8 years ago, this building wasn't as utilized as it is now. There's basically every element of this building has something in it now. 7, 8 years ago, even this whole side, this was open, I guess, for the Welcome Center a couple months a year, but that whole back wasn't area. And now you've got the dormitories fully utilized to some degree. You've got the Welcome Center and the chamber activating the front, council here, obviously the Wellness Center. This building, we knew was going to be, I almost call it a leaky bucket because there's always something that is losing water. But the reality is we knew we had to invest in it, so we wanted to make sure this building served the community even more. And one of the foundational debates is, imagine this community in the winter without this building. Imagine what would be here. So that's why that was a healthy conversation even when I first got on council. And I will say that there continues to be cost, but at least now the building is properly servicing the community to a higher level. So, but healthy, because it seems like every 5 years it's the same story, to fairness. Okay, let's jump into utility.
Okay. The next slide says concern is actually out of order with the title page, but I will say under the general, even with this budget under general, before we jump into utility, our borrowing only goes up to 8.8%. And I said 10% was kind of the magic number. Sorry, Vicky's making emotions. Didn't know she was at me, but I'll ignore. Squirrel type of syndrome, sorry. But again, we got to still consider about the wharf and the cost, and the cost continues to escalate in economic conditions. They could go down. I think there's possibilities. So now we'll go to the utility. For the utilities, there's more challenges. There should be $7.5 million in projects over 5 years. As I said in your package, really for the next 2 years, we're kind of maxed out. After that, without raising user fees, we're at our capacity to pay for everything. And so with that said, we'll get into that. But we do need a new steel reservoir in 5 years, or should have one. We looked at refurbishing it 2 years ago, and the quote was about $500,000 more than the engineers had estimated, and only $200,000 less than a whole new facility. So council at the time said that we should just hold the money and get a new facility. And so that should be on the table in 2027. So under the utility, we've got total projects of $1,137,000. I do want to talk about the top two ones that's listed 3 or 4 pages in. One of them is Champlain Avenue. So the Champlain Avenue we're talking about is from Cemetery Road to the back entrance to Kira. So it's the gravel road that goes by Oppenheimer's Museum and extends all the way down there. It was originally on the books to do this year, but the cost came up so high that we had to cut it out. Now the cost of doing that's about $650,000. That's only for a water line, not sewer. And the issue I have business-wise is there's 7 or 8 seasonal residents there, and that's a lot of money for a little bit of water that's going to be pumped through those. The line is old, they do get breaks in it, but we've got to, you've got to kind of balance the more for the few against the few. And so what a recommendation we have is once upon a time we never thought you could get potable water wells around Katie's Cove. I was always told that it was brackish, but we know that like the people in Quoddy Shore Loop are on wells. They are higher, but they're on wells. And then the Quanas down at the Katie's Cove or Katie's Cove Inc. have drilled a well for their bathrooms. I can't say for sure what the volume is and stuff, but I think there should be a healthy discussion about whether we just aid those landowners and install wells on those properties. It'd save us more than half. But, we're looking at $20,000 to $25,000 a well. So you're talking $200,000 for those property owners versus $650,000 plus.
And just on that, the property owners would be paying less as a result of that as well?
Yeah, like the recommendation, we install the well, help pay for a pump if we want. If they just set aside the money they would have paid for their water bill every year, or even half of it, to be honest, they could replace their pump every 3 years, and pumps last. I'm only on my second one after 27 years. So, I think it's economically, if the waters fit down that way, and the properties have to be big enough, because they already are on sewer, so you have to need a full acre. We think it's a state residential down there, and I didn't do a property-by-property assessment, but it looked like most of them met that criteria. So, personally, and Public Works may not agree because of the number of work they've had to do on it, but still, for 2 repairs a year, I think we defer this one for a year and try to look at maybe drill 1 well down there for somebody and see if it works. There is legislation about removing water mains. You've actually got to get the minister's approval, but it shouldn't be a problem if we have an alternative solution, meaning we're not just cutting them off, we're just trying to find a better way to deliver it. So it's complicated, and we'd like the time to do all of this. And so what I'd say is we set down $30,000 or $40,000 to drill 1 well and do some studies, and then defer this at least a year to figure out if it should be done and how it should be done, not move anything else. It'll also give us a time. We're kind of in, as you know, between asset managers right now, and when Mr. Acton returns, we'll be able to kind of sit through and do a longer-term plan, look at the rates, and give council, here's what the rates are going to be. We're also going to have our meter system back in place, hopefully by the spring. We're very actively working at that right now. And so we'll see what the consumption's like and start to get a real idea of what it's going to cost different properties from large to the small for this.
Thank you. I just to that point, I think it's worth investigating and finding out. Like we've seen this before, where there's been lines even outside the municipality that financially it would never pay itself back, and that's clearly the case for these users. Like, we'll never get back in water billing enough to ever pay for this infrastructure. So it's something worth considering, that's for sure. Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you. Just in regarding, obviously we're losing the ability to fight fires in that area of those homes. That would impact their insurances as well. Could we be liable for costs or damages to those properties?
So there's two ways to look at it. Number one is the whole area isn't protected by fire hydrants. Even the old St. Andrews, there's lots is, but there's some places that aren't. But our longer-term plan would actually probably to extend a line from Cemetery to Acadia, just on the other corner of where the Oppenheimer Museum is, and put a fire hydrant there. That was a request of the fire department to consider that. There are 3 or 4 residents close together in that one little block that are full-time residents that would be serviced by that line, and then would also allow the fire protection for the remainder of the road, enhanced fire protection, because right now, Councillor Neal, I think it's the corner of Diana and Cemetery is the closest hydrant, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, me saying yes. So that long term, that would probably be our plan. So we'd still have to spend a little bit in that little section, enhanced fire protection, and then go with the other. But we'll have that all figured out over the next, give us a few months next year to work that out and come back with a follow-up plan to council.
Thank you. Councillor Ware.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to the wells, there would be no reason why they couldn't share wells if they had sufficient water flow, is there?
Wrong question. I guess that's a health department question. I don't know, to put it bluntly. A lot of it will depend on the volume, but it's a question. But it's a question I can ask what the health department thinks of multiple properties sharing well. I think it's a great idea. The only thing that becomes a little bit of a problem is if you and I are sharing a well, but it's on my property, then you have to put like an easement or right of way and all that stuff. I think it's a good idea worth investigating for sure.
Because I replaced the pipe and pump in mine, and I put it down 350 feet, and it was less than $2,000, and that was, 10 years ago. But wow. And the only reason I replaced the pump was because I had the pipe out. So I said, well, I must put a new pump down there. It's only $400. So,
No, I'd agree, and I think that's a good option to continue to look at.
Okay. Next one.
I think.
Sorry, Councillor Michelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to keep in mind and to add to the discussion that the town owns that lot, kitty corner to where the fire hydrant would be. So if we ever decided to do something with that lot, whether put in housing or, I don't know, a mountain bike park or whatever, something like that, but or housing, having a water line there would be good at that time. So, and it's closer to the corner, but we do own that lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Michelle. All right.
Thank you, Worship. So the next item was one of those unpleasant surprises. And speaking of a leaky bucket, this is in the water treatment plant. But there's an item in there called a strainer, which basically looks like a washing machine, a big washing machine. Has a big drum that's filters that spins as the water goes through. It's made out of stainless steel, no, aluminum. And it developed a crack, which is unusual. It's from 2005 when the building was built. Hypothetically, you should get they said the 25-year life roughly, but there's places in other areas that are getting 50, 60 years out of them. But there's just one of those things, no one knows why, it cracked. We did try to repair it, but because it was aluminum, they couldn't get it repaired. Aluminum won't weld really well. So we did spend $2,000 or $3,000. And so that unit should be replaced, and it's $400,000, which was unexpected, which is too bad, but it's needed. What we did do is within our own budget is we went to our engineers and asked them to put out a RFP, because it's one of those things that there's alternative ways of doing it. So, the engineers of the day in the town and council agreed at this one way, but there's other alternative ways of doing the same type of thing. And so we're hoping that there is a cheaper way to do it. This $400,000 is the price. Honestly, if whatever you approve, I think it's 7 or 8 months to get it ordered and installed. The water that's coming out is coming out slow enough that it's not a concern. And it's not, the Department of Health's not concerned, but it should be replaced. It's just as it continues to go, it'll continue to wear, et cetera, et cetera. So we do have 2 units out there. It's redundant, which is great. And so the good unit is going to be our primary unit now, and just using the other one as the other one's being cleaned and serviced and things to try to minimize the use on it. But back to a discussion earlier about what needs to be done, this needs to be done. If nothing else gets done this year. We have $50,000 in a residential and commercial meter program. There's going to have to be a discussion sooner rather than later about water meters. So our current bylaw says that it's up to businesses to replace their own water meters. And the reason being is a residential water meter, a small water meter is a couple of $100. Residential ones can be up to $5,000 or $6,000 if they're like a 6-inch or even a 4 and 5-inch. The problem is there's no incentive for the businesses to trade them out, because water meters only slow down. They're just basically a spinner, on a meter as it goes through, and so the spinner slows down. They're saving money. And so we had a water consultant come in and do studies 4 or 5 years ago. Councillor Gumichel had found them for us out of Halifax. And they said the same. They said that, the meters should be replaced at least every decade. Some of them out in our system are 25 to 30 years old. And so we think that we think we should buy them, and it could take a few years to do that, or we're going to have to actively insist on these businesses doing it, and they probably won't be tremendously happy, because in addition to the cost of the meter, there's probably another $500 to $1,000 for a plumber to come in and install it. They're fairly big pieces of hardware. So right now, we've planned to be the ones to replace it. We think we'll make it back economically as soon as they're replaced within a year or two. That'll pick up what they've lost just because of the wear and tear on the meter. But once council kind of looks at these estimates, we're going to have to redo the water bylaw and maybe have a discussion at that point exactly what you want to do with that.
Councillor Harlan.
Chris, just how many meters are we talking?
60.
Just my preliminary comments on that is it's hard to charge people for the mechanism in which you're charging them. So probably the thing that would make the most sense, and like most businesses, is you pay for it as in the town, and you absorb the cost of administering the system through the rates. So versus upfront to you, it's cost of doing business. We buy it, but we absorb it within our rates as best as you can. That would be I think the best thing. So to charge a business saying you got to pay us this many $1,000 to start charging you, so we can charge you to use water, like it just doesn't seem like the way to go about it when you build that into your model and say this is what we got to charge in order to have like that to me.
Yeah, and
that makes more sense.
Other communities, larger cities, usually have rentals on those meters, but it's really just for that purpose, is they're saving the money up, and then the breaks, they use that money to offset it, so I agree with you.
Unfortunately, at the end of the day, whatever way you argue is the consumer does pay for it.
Yeah.
Because someone has to pay for it, right? So, but yeah, I think your point's taken on that.
Okay, so other additional smaller purchases I think are worth, we think we should have at the water treatment facility 2 additional cameras. It's just out in the Harkness there, so it's in today's day and age, it's it's not a lot of money, $5,500. Water pumps in the building, we've been going through 1 or 2 every couple of years. There's a year wait to get them, and we'd like this one as a spare. At the wastewater lagoon, we have pumps that are sitting outside for $5,000. We'd like to build a little shed to get them inside. I mean, they deal with water, so the rain and snow technically doesn't hurt them, but it doesn't help them, if you know what I mean. There's rubber parts and gaskets and stuff that'll wear in the weather, so we'd like to do that. And within the wastewater lagoon, there's a grinder flight pump that basically takes big solids and makes them into much smaller solids, like you would in a trash compressor. And so that needs to be replaced for about $8,000. So almost everything there, maybe with the exception of the cameras, are really things we should have, and would probably argue that cameras in today's climate would be a very good thing to have.
Councillor Hurdle.
Just a quick question. Is there a concern for security at the wastewater plant? Like, is there a concern about security at the wastewater?
Yeah, actually, last year, it's fenced and locked, but the truck used to sit out in the yard, and someone came in and stole the catalytic converter off a new truck, and it was like $4,000 to get that replaced. Frankly, the truck hasn't worked all that well since. Yeah. And then it is our water supply. Yeah, I just won't get too deep into it, but you just, people break into anything these days, so it's important to have a look.
All right, is that it, Mr. Spear, for that?
For that particular capital, so if we just jump to the next slide, sorry. Okay. So in order to pay for the stuff, we're looking at $217,000 from operations, but another $780,000 in debt. So the debt keeps climbing there, and $140,000 to the tax fund. It should be noted that the gas tax fund could have a different look. They actually ran out this year, and they're renegotiating it at the provincial level with the province, so we'll have to wait and see. I can't imagine it being any less. Hopefully it's a lot more, but yeah, I know. But we'll see how that looks like going down the future. It's election year for somebody somewhere.
I'll turn my mic off.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. But so I guess we've already talked about that, but it was about deferring the Champlain, and then we're going to see the results of going back to metered billing. So next steps for the budget, we want to wait for more data from local government. We did get the assessments, like I mentioned, late last week, and I'll be able to install that. Policing is a real wild card, and they're supposed to have the data to us a couple of 3 weeks ago. They told us in August that they'd have it by mid-September. We still haven't seen it. So for them, I think it's just a lot more complicated than they thought, because they're moving contracts with federal partners and stuff, but I'm going to have to put out a call to there and see what the heck they can give us, even if it's under the old model. And then solid waste, we'll have to have discussions with our local hauler, but also from the provincial hauler. And then, so staff would like to put together another draft and then get ready to meet, recommending 2 weeks from yesterday, I guess. Andrew doesn't need any sleep this, he just came on vacation, so he can work for the next 2 weeks.
He's fresh.
He's ready.
I sat in his chair and wore a sweater. Just on this, does 2 weeks give you enough time to do kind of a scrub? Do you think that's, just because I really think and I'd almost encourage it for the operating budget too, just because every dollar we save on operating, that's essentially more for reserves at the end of the day, right?
More time is always better, Your Worship, but 2 weeks is what? The 23rd. I guess another discussion, not that I want to do this to you, but a few years ago we did meet on a weekend on a Saturday. Well, but the problem is at night you're tired, and then sometimes it's after other business. If you came in here for 8 or 9 o'clock, I think the last time we were out of here 4 hours, staff's good with whatever you want. I'm just throwing it out there. But we could probably make something in 2 weeks, because in 3 weeks, we're planning on the 30th, we're planning on the open house for the wharf. So unless we pushed it back a little bit to like the 25th or 26th.
Okay.
Staff's open.
So let's try to set that for a target, and you can communicate up to 3 business days in advance to let us, like, we can adjust. And I think that'd be really good. And then at that meeting, like, I know you're getting the over the 10% based on growth, but for our tax base, but when do we get the breakdown between that's new construction versus assessment increases? When do we get that information?
I might already have that. I'll have to look. There's 2 or 3 different sources of information, some from Service New Brunswick, and the provincial stuff came from the province on Friday, so we just got to have a quick look and see what was what. The provincial stuff only says what's residential and non-residential. I think Service New Brunswick gave me something a week or 2 ago that said what was new and what was growth.
Sounds good. So what staff will do is they'll do a scrub if at all possible, and then what I'd like to do is start seeing a parking lot of the nice, because the things you have to do are the things you have to do. We'll look at them, but the nice to haves, I think we go in detail and say these are ones that we'd really like to have, right? So, Councilor Blanchard.
Sorry, Your Worship, I just got a call. I've got to step out here, if that's okay.
I actually do too. So.
Okay.
That's why, I don't know if you guys notice I'm kind of a bit urgent right now.
Sorry, Your Worship, at this point, it is 2.5 hours.
Yep.
So
So
does council wish to continue?
Is there, yeah, so I guess I need a formal motion to continue anyway.
You would need a formal motion to continue as well. You also added a closed session.
All right, so is that, just before I do that, because I do have 1 minute, does everyone feel good about that for next steps?
Your Worship,
okay.
can I just ask for a little bit of clarity? When I say scrub, do I still include everything and just say what we think can be removed, or actually physically remove it out of the budget?
What I'd like to actually see is everything that has to be included in the budget, and then you add at the bottom the list of the things staff thinks really would be nice to have. Remember, there's some things you have to. There's things that we've committed. I'll use the dog park example. We're not backing out on any commitments that we have. I'm pretty sure, knowing everyone around this table, when we say we're going to do something, we do it. But let's see what that looks like, because I really am hesitant to really add a lot of new debt, not knowing what the wharf's going to bring. But I'd really like to see almost like priority A's of the nice to haves. And council, you're going to get that document, and I'd like you to look through it, because there could be something that's a B that for you is an A, right? And we need to have that dialogue where everyone can weigh in. I think that A's and B's, that's something that might be not a full day, not to scare anyone, but it could be a Saturday session, or maybe even a Sunday afternoon session from 12 to 5 or something, or whatever works for everyone's personal schedules. I think we may have to sit down and just hammer through it, because that's what we've done in the past. But the staff scrub is so important in this process. Like, it's good to see everything, but it's good to see everything that we have to do. And I really think with the debt levels, especially the utility fund, that's what we have to do right now. So, all right, anyone else? But because I know that 2.5, so I do need just a formal motion just to continue past 2.5. I'll get through the rest of the agenda as quickly as possible. Could I have someone move to extend the meeting? Councillor Neal seconded, but Councillor Heenan, discussion on extending it. All in favor of extending the meeting, please signify by saying aye. Okay, we're on borrowed time. And we are done the actual budget part of the meeting. I'm going to grab my agenda here. It's buried in paperwork. Nothing under new business. Question period. Was there anything submitted throughout? And if there's anyone online. Okay, we're all good? Okay, we're skipping question period. Councillor and Deputy Mayor's comments. I know we each did around. Anything anyone would like to add? Councillor Heenan.
I would just like to add a big thank you to Charlotte County and our surrounding areas for the CCH, the Charlotte County Hospital, raising over $550,000 on their radiothon. Thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah, and Councillor Hurd, just on that one, the town of St. Andrews did donate $300 towards that cause.
Thank you. I know we've all been invited to, on November the 20th, an invitation to see Neighborhood Works in action in St. Stephen. I just want to encourage everybody to take part in that. It is a tremendous organization that does a lot of good work in the area. Thank you.
You should give me a follow-up. I'd have to follow up with someone who sent me a Facebook message, so thank you for that.
7 p.m. on November the 20th.
Thank you. I have no comments, so I'm looking for a motion to go into closed session. I've got Councillor Gumashell, seconded by Councillor Harlan. And for discussion, that is things that could cause financial loss. Or want to give the section just to be formal, please?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Section 68(1)(c) of the Local Governance Act, information that could cause financial loss or gain to a person or the local government, or could jeopardize negotiations leading to an agreement or
Thank you very much. So any other discussion? All in favor of going to closed session, please signify by saying aye. We are in closed session. We'll give a minute to shut down technology. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into the budget meetings.